Investing insights with Right Property Group, exploring trends in real estate and helping property investors gain financial security.
Hey there everybody, Steve Waters and Victor Kumar back for the second last podcast of the year, Vic.
Yeah, it has flown, hasn't it?
Hasn't it been just one long day?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I describe 2021 is just one long day. Those on the East Coast would know what I'm talking about, or specifically Melbourne and Sydney, but all the guys and girls from the West Coast or even Brisbane have done it pretty easy compared to us.
I think for Sydney-siders and Melbourneites, this is the year of the great fatigue.
Yeah. And actually I was talking to someone the other day about that, just saying I think there's going to be, this Christmas holidays, I think people are just going to want to break
Switch off
between their ears.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been so many components clearly over the last couple of years, but I think this year's been harder
it
for
has
most.
been, right? Because it was actually 2022 reloaded, wasn't it? In terms of the lockdown.
Yeah, probably was, especially for Sydney, because we really didn't have a lockdown until this year.
Yep.
It was a Clayton's lockdown, but poor old Victoria, or Melbourne in particular.
Yeah, longest lockdown in the world.
It's a pretty good title to have. But definitely been a massive year, and this is, as I mentioned, the second last podcast of the year. And today we thought we'd talk about clearly what's happened and those major events, and some not so major and some not so obvious, but how they'll shape 2022 and beyond.
Yep.
And then for the last podcast of the year, we'll give our predictions on what will happen and where, but that'll be the next podcast.
In 2022 as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we do that, quick market update, Vic,
Yes.
because it is so dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
Yeah. So tell me, what have you been finding in the market?
So definitely more stock on the market. The urgency or the frantic selling seems not to be there. So the properties are sticking a little bit longer on the market. There definitely isn't any price reduction as such, but instead of selling within the day of it being listed, the property sticks around for a week and a half before the vendors are able to get their price. Yeah, and it's a bit more, I think, a direct derivative of what's actually happening in the market, where buyers are coming in now. They've got more choice, so they're making multiple offers on multiple properties, and they're saying whichever one sticks, I'll take it. So that's why these properties are tending to stick a little bit longer on the market, but definitely the market is still very much buoyant at the moment.
Yeah, we're being quite general, because otherwise it'd be a 4-hour podcast to talk about the different types of markets throughout Australia. But I agree that it's definitely a more liquid market now. And I know some people would argue that point, saying, well, it's always been liquid over the last 6 months because things were flying out the door. And that's true, but it was only liquid on one side of the equation, being the seller. Now it's liquid for the buyer, meaning that there is more choice, as you indicated, and that they do have a little bit more time up their sleeves, but also, once again, better choice, more choice. And they're not having to, the element of FOMO is now starting to recede out of the market. And in some cases, you might even argue that some areas, the sellers have got a bit of a FOMO scenario happening as well, saying, well, I wish I should have, I could have sold 6 months ago, would have been easier. Now it's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. So just a recent report that was released where they're saying that apart from Sydney and Canberra, the listings actually starting to slow down a little bit in the lead up to Christmas, which is a normal phenomenon, right? Because if you look at it from a logistics point of view, you've got to list the property. So in other words, sign this selling agreement. Then you have to order the searches and get the contracts ready, get the photographs done, load it onto realestate.com and domain, and launch the property. And seeing that at the time of recording this podcast, we are 2.5, 3 weeks away from Christmas. Most people are choosing to say, you know what, the solicitors will be away from the 17th onwards. Even if I find a buyer, there's that lull period of 2, maybe 3 weeks. I might as well wait till January and launch it at that point in time. And hopefully I can catch the wave of the New Year's resolution as well.
Yeah, definitely, because best case, it's a month before you make the decision to actually getting a property on the market.
Yeah, which is a great analogy as to or indicator as to why property isn't that liquid, because it's a slower moving piece, right? From the time that you actually decide to sell, it usually takes up to a month to actually be ready, market ready to
Correct.
sell.
Yeah. And there's different variances of that,
Yeah.
and different states take longer and what have you. But generally speaking, the market is more liquid now, in our opinion. As I said, there's more choice. I think the stupidity for the most has come out of the market on both sides, being selling and purchasing. In fact, the agents are going to have a real problem over the next 6 months or thereabouts, having to
Adjusting.
condition their sellers or their vendors, because the vendors or sellers have seen the market ramp and perpetuate and get silly prices. And so potentially sellers might think, well, my property is worth this, quadrillion, and the agents for the last 6 months probably would have said, okay, well, let's give that a go.
Yeah. Watch the doomsayers come out saying there's a market crash because it's not selling.
Yeah, days on market. But anyway, the agents are going to have to condition the vendors, but they still want the listings. So they'd probably agree with the seller initially to get the sales contract and then start to, in our language, condition them to a more marketable position, which the buyer will dictate.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And the traditional words they use is the market has spoken or the market has given feedback. It's actually, this is in our jargon, we call it buying the listing.
Correct. Yeah. Promise them the world and then
crunch them down.
Change the parameters as the ink dries. When we say our world, not us, but just in what we have to deal with every day. So I think the market will soften. And I know we're slinking into next week's or next end of 2 weeks podcast, but I do think the market will soften. Now, that I want to be clear that doesn't mean it'll go backwards. It just means that the rate of growth will start to get back to normality rather than the dizziness that we've happened. And to be honest with you, that's what we want.
Exactly. We want a bit of stability.
Yeah. We don't want the large vertical growth, believe it or not, because there has to be a catch up or a catch down somewhere else. So let's talk. So that's the market update. Everything is
still the same, except there's a bit more liquidity.
Correct. And things are still selling quickly. But the auction results are still strong, even though I noticed that the media sort of slammed last week's auction results saying there's been a massive drop, but it's still above average.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
Yeah, it's just to play on data, so to speak, which ties into, I think it was last podcast or the podcast before that, around be careful of the data and understand the truth behind it. But today we wanted to talk about those major, obvious, and maybe some not so obvious things that have happened over the last 12 months.
Yep.
And how it will affect the market going forward. So the big one is clearly COVID, Delta lockdowns, and that's had an amazing effect to clearly worldwide economies, Australia's economies, personal economies, and the like. But the big thing for me between 2021 and 2020 was the difference. The major piece was the finishing of the mortgage moratorium. The slowdown in JobKeeper, but the amplification of Job Creator.
Yes.
And people's war chests that they'd created during 2020 and maybe early 2021 didn't end up being necessary.
And they were itching to spend it.
But they were itching to spend it. And whatever the asset class or the white goods or whatever it may be, those war chests were full. And when people's war chests, in other words, bank money in the bank, offset, whatever it is, when they've got it, it makes them feel good between the ears. It's a wealth effect, essentially, and they feel secure. And I believe that's why, or one component anyway, that's why we're starting to see inflation creep up. We're starting to see supply bottlenecks across the world and the like. But that's been one of the major things for me, and that will definitely have an effect over the next couple of years.
Absolutely. So even though we're talking about 2021, we've got to talk about 2020 as well, right? Because what happened was that this was a new thing that hit the market, a la COVID. And people weren't sure how it was going to pan out. No one did. And initially, they were very hands-off. Let's watch what's going to happen before we jump back in. So 2020, in the early days, so probably the first 3 quarters of 2020, a lot of people did sit on the sidelines. But then the FOMO effect crept right back in. Also given the fact that the mortgage moratoriums helped them create a bit more of liquid cash as well. And people jump back into the market in the droves, fearing about missing out on the growth. And so one of the things that has panned out in 2021, which will perhaps manifest itself in 2022, 23, maybe up to 25, is the fact that people have gone in and bought for the sake of buying. Money is really cheap. The FOMO effect is very much there. You've got a lot of disposable income because you couldn't spend it anywhere else. So they've jumped in, they've maxed out their borrowing capacity, they've maxed out their affordability, not from a bank's perspective, but from a household perspective.
From a personal.
Yes. And now, as the mortgages change and as the market starts shaping up and the psyche of the investor changes as well, because you're seeing a perceived slowdown in the market, you will see people that will start, in your terms, become the resentful investor and start resenting the properties they've bought because everyone else has had growth. I haven't had growth.
Yeah.
So your turn would come, if provided the foundations are right and the fundamentals are right. The turn will come. When one can only look towards Brisbane, where just a short 4 years ago, people are saying, Brisbane's bad, no growth, it's never going to grow. To now, it's the flavour of the month.
It's the hot market. It's it really is the flavour of the month. But you mentioned like the war chest, and I was talking about building them up via these different mechanisms. Mortgage moratorium. You mentioned a very important part too, that nobody could spend it. You couldn't go anywhere, and that goes all the way down to fuel, tolls, holidays, clothes, eating out. It all accumulates into your bank account.
Perhaps the only thing that went up was the liquor bill, alcohol.
Yeah. Yes. I'm not in your household. It's
maybe the carver bill.
I was about to say, how did you get your carver? Like that would have been.
You know what? People find innovative ways.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I'll leave it at that.
Did you create mud bricks? Those that have had carver will know what I'm talking about. So as those war chests built, that in itself is a form of liquidity, even though inadvertently you created liquidity being that sort of capital, which is one of the things we talk about all the time, about be liquid all the time. So could you imagine if you had have had, let's call it experience, and 2020 unfolded, and eventually, as you imagine, we'll go back when it first happened, everybody across the world was, well, what is this? Yeah. Is it real? Are we all going to die?
How long will it be?
Will the economies collapse and we'll go into these major depressions and recessions and what have you? But imagine if you knew with a degree of certainty that this will wash out and that you were in a position, as many people were, via liquidity, via security, by income, to then purchase at the beginning of 2020.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my secret fantasies is Back to the Future. You know how the guy had the
This is a different type of podcast, Nick. This is PG.
You know how that guy had the almanac and he could go back and predict because he had the races all mapped out. He was making a mozza because he was picking the right winners, right? If only we could have that for property.
Well, it'd be nice. It'd be Back to the Future. Yeah. But there were a handful of us that were saying at the beginning of COVID, in fact, we did release a video saying, look, this is history repeating itself, albeit different trigger points as we've discussed before, but this is how it will potentially roll out.
Yeah.
And not because we're the smartest people in the room at all, but we've seen the cycle many times.
Different shapes and forms, but still the same metrics.
Correct. And if we go back and let's look at what happened, and then it'll be so obvious. So clearly, as we mentioned, the liquidity factor, so the moratorium, the decreasing of the cost of money, the loosening of credit policy, job security for many, not for all, unfortunately, and we won't even talk about health. So we've got liquidity, cost of money decreasing, and
rents increasing,
ease of credit policy, rents increasing in some areas, but not initially because of the you weren't allowed to essentially, and then the big one, every state and territory throwing government grants out to people. Like if you which was pretty obvious to us at the time, this is what will happen. But if for those that are listening and saying, well, more luck than good management, not really. When you have all those components come together, and let me tell you, it's not the first time that it's happened.
Yeah. It's just that COVID was the trigger.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the consequences or the effect is what we have today. But even if you go back further to 2016 and 2017 with APRA pulling the handbrake, that also played a part into where we are today with the lack of accommodation or the lack of housing or accommodation and undersupply of a lot of areas. So you actually had probably nearly a dozen components coming together to create
the perfect storm,
to create the perfect scenario. But once again, it's not the first time.
Yeah, all you've got to do is have a look back at GFC.
Correct.
Right? I know that there'd be a lot of people that do remember the GFC. When it initially came in, it was all doom and gloom, and the media was having a absolute heyday, saying, this is the end of the financial world as we know it, right?
Correct.
To a degree, that was true because people became a little bit more cautious. But with every adversity, there is a wealth transfer. Well, this is where people that are well informed, prepared, and willing to shut out the digital noise benefit from these sort of scenarios.
Good point, because that's the difference between this and the GFC.
That's right.
Is the digital noise, which I'll get to in a minute. But you're right, one person's risk is another person's opportunity.
That's it.
And whether it be the GFC, even you go back further to 2000-ish, I think it was, 2001, I should know, with basically the invention of the low doc loan, as well as a few other triggers, not too dissimilar to what we've just been through, and then the GFC in terms of the components to stimulate a market that were implemented, and you had it, and you got a result. Then the GFC, you got a result. To some degree, also the election, you got a result. As we say, there's always a crisis. It's just how big is it and what do you do with it?
Yeah,
it's the part of it. But coming back to the digital world, if you will, and as we've talked about before, the way that property is searched today is different from what it was just a mere 5 years ago. Even 3 years ago, it's differently. But you even go back to pre-GFC, and there's almost nothing similar.
Yeah. I remember you and me going into real estate agent's office and they're pulling out a leave arch folder and flipping through. I've got this one that's been on the market for 3 months. I've got this one that's been on 6 months, right? And then you see these faded signs on the window.
And you knew that the more faded they are, the older they were, and the more potentially negotiable they were if it wasn't just based.
That's right. And it was truly relationship-based and knowledge-based, like on-ground knowledge in a sense, because there was no updated iPhone app or phone app to quickly check whether it was sold or not. You had to actually physically talk to someone.
Yeah, and the transfer of data took
very slow,
a lot longer. Today it's almost instant. So we've got the digital world where it's enabled us over the last, let's call it decade, that has enabled us to be far more educated, far more diligent, far more effective. But if we bring it forward to what's just happened in the last 12 months and how the digital world and technology has changed significantly, that'll have a definite effect next year and the year after and forevermore. Have a look at how quickly agents and purchasers and sellers have changed in terms of inspections. So
contracts, how are they signed now?
Yeah, one point at a time. Steal my thunder. It's but like it was unheard of almost before to get a video and make a decision off that. Not that we're fully into that, and we believe there's got to be other steps of diligence
checks and balances,
beforehand. But there was even the professional companies doing the videos for the agents and the sellers through to the buyers. So the transaction still happened. In other words, buyers, sellers, and agents found a way to make it happen, which has now become somewhat of the new norm over the years. Then to your point around contracts, like because of things like HelloSign, DocuSign, PandaSign, and all the other bazillion other document facilities, contracts now are done instantly. Now that wouldn't have happened 2 to 3 years ago.
Even beginning of 2020, we were having trouble getting some agents to accept contracts that we had signed and scanned to them. They wanted the physical stuff.
Correct. And so once again, even though it was always in the pipeline of happening, COVID 2021 and beyond has brought forward a lot of what was ideas and concepts into reality to make the whole process more streamlined, more effective in terms of cost and time, which will have a very unique effect
going forward,
which I don't think people can grasp how big a difference it'll be.
What COVID's done is truly brought real estate into the digital age.
Into the 21st century, literally, because it was a bit of an antiquated industry.
Yes.
There's a lot of yesteryear operators and sellers, for that matter, because you think about it, just even the elder generation, the baby boomers who probably aren't as clued up on tech savvy, and you've got a person saying, "Oh, you just sign the screen, and that'll do." But now they've learnt, they've accepted it, and then you've got the younger generations coming through
that have never seen anything else.
Correct. Yeah. And so I think the tech startups of 2020, 2021 in our space, in the property industry, real estate industry, I think that is going to have a major, major, major effect over next year and the years to follow. So COVID has been kind.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the other more important or just as important changes that have happened in the investing sphere is obviously the finance and how it's changed from being really loose to slowly tapping the brakes to now, definite changes in terms of debt to service ratio, flagging 90% loans, interest onlys are going to be a thing of the past in 2023. So the flow on is that the banks are now starting to independently move their rates as well.
Yeah, so let's explore that. So finance, clearly, as we mentioned, loosened credit policy and rates came down and loosened up at the beginning, or it's probably 2019 end through to probably early this year. Yep. Then we were brake checked by APRA, which was that psychological card they threw on the table hoping for an effect, and it had zero, as we said it would. Then you now have the narrative, as you've just mentioned, around LVR positions changing, interest-only components changing, and the banks have got to hold more liquidity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fixed rates have gone up by 1% over the last 8 weeks.
And that's an immense change.
It's a huge change, but no one's talking about it.
It hasn't been flagged in the media as much.
Correct. That's all on the negative side of things, which will definitely, once again, have an effect over the years to come. Not all negative either. Not sort of stick a fork in your eye negative. Yep. But there's also been some positive changes through credit policy as well because of COVID. The rates came down.
Yes.
Like that's a
banks were more willing to lend money.
To the forefront came different lenders with different products to accommodate. There was also more education around finance. One of the things COVID has done is while everybody was locked at home, a great deal of the population was locked at home, there was a certain amount of bandwidth for them to be able to educate them, because as I just pivot for a minute, let's not forget that during the middle of the lockdowns in 2020 and 2021, one of the data points we were watching was high intent search activity. Yes. And it was the highest it's been
ever.
Yeah. So it's people's minds were percolating. And so therefore their search criteria, their self-education, whether it be listening through podcasts like this or courses or whatever it may be, was ramping up, because I believe COVID gave everybody a wake-up call about the security of their income for the future. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that, with COVID, what it's truly done, and this is something we've been talking right from the beginning in terms of what real estate investing really is. What is investing in the sense? It's actually income replacement. A lot of people talk about wealth creation, talk about how much equity they're going to have, but it should really be focused towards income replacement. And it brought it to the forefront of everyone's mind when 2020 hit. Initially, there was a shudder in the market to say, okay, what's happened? Then 2021, everyone started really looking at, okay, my job security really isn't there. I'm not quite happy doing what I want, what I'm doing right now. I want to do something else. So what can I do? And so the focus came truly back towards income replacement via property investment, via shares investment. So everyone started looking at, okay, how else can I get other streams of income happening to then either change my career, change my methodology of working without, I want to work 5 days, or I want to work 7 days, or really, I just want to work 2 days. So how can I replace that? And that's why a lot of people also jump into the market, really chasing that holy grail of income replacement.
Correct. And as you say that, even though I know this is about what happened this year to affect next year and the year beyond, but if we go back just a little bit further, which we touched on before around technology.
Yes.
And we've mentioned this before, but technology has enabled everybody to be an entrepreneur. You could be in the caves of nowhere, and as long as you've got an internet connection, you could be drop shipping T-shirts that you haven't even paid for yet. It's allowed people to do better.
Yes.
There's also a heap of negatives to it as well, but it has allowed people to be entrepreneurial. And in fact, I was out somewhere the other day and I asked at a dinner, and everyone was saying what they did, and this particular gentleman got asked, "What do you do?" And he goes, "I'm an entrepreneur." That was his title. And it was...
Seems like a badge everyone wants to wear at the moment.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think a lot of people sort of take it a little bit too far, but people want to do better for themselves. And there's all those Gary V's and what have you that talk about side hustles, up hustles, down hustles, and all that sort of business. Whichever way you paint it up, people want to do better than what they've been through or what they've experienced. Their goals are bigger. They know that there's the ability there, the education is there. You don't have to pay $75,000 platinum fees per year to get told what the secret is. It's there. It is all on the interweb for you to be able to learn. However, knowledge and execution are very different things. Two different things. And as I come back one step, the ability of technology, which has been amplified by COVID, for me, is property has become democratized.
I agree.
It is now understood a lot better. There are some people, though, to be fair, that are just buying because they've read on social media that's Bill and Mary have made $1 quadrillion overnight, and I want a piece of that. Well, they're not investing; they're speculating.
Yep.
And in fact, they're not even investors. So there are those that still chase the holy grail of a quick buck, and as we all know, property's not that asset type. We'll get bigger wins along the way. That's great, but it's not that type of asset. So property's been democratized for everybody, whether it be via DocuSign and the likes, contracts, pest and building reports. Everything is now available, not just to the haves. It's even to the have-nots, if you want to split it that way.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So with finance changes, and this is something that will actually, as we mentioned in the beginning, how does 2021 shape 22 and 23? One of the key things that it will shape is with these finance changes that are happening, you will see some casualties in 22 and 23 when these people that have redlined their affordability, I'm not saying redlined their borrowing capacity, they've redlined their affordability. They get into the market where they can't refinance, they can't debt consolidate, and they want to get back to their original lifestyle of jetting out to the to the Bahamas and things like that. And they realize that, hang on, we've committed our money here. So there will be a little bit again of shift of wealth, people selling down properties, having these Facebook stories of look at me, I've made $150,000 profit because I bought during COVID, and here am I sipping pina coladas because I've made this investment. And you'll have that new wave of catch-up investors. They'll then jump in and then realize that they can't actually borrow.
Correct, because they haven't stacked the deck in their favour maybe the years beforehand. Yeah, doing what it takes at that point. Like if we just flesh that out a bit further, what you're doing right now, especially in today's tightening credit environment, we know rates are going to go up probably 0.5% over the next year or something like that, but what you're doing now will hold you in good stead or not for next year around finance. So something simple. You've spent nothing over the last 2 years because you couldn't. No going out, and I'm being quite general, clearly. No going out, no holidays, no fuel, no tolls, as I mentioned before. And so when the banks were looking at your spending habits, they're, oh yeah, this is cool, you're not spending anything.
Yeah.
Now we've got a bit of mobility. Now there's a bit of freedom. Now there's the revenge spend.
And then they flash it out over a year, right? They
Correct. And then you go to get a loan in a tightening credit policy environment with higher rates, serviceability back end.
Yeah.
Plus now you've got debit, because you're enjoying life and everyone's entitled to. But it will have an absolute effect on your capacity over the next 12 months without fail. And so those that could borrow may be in a position where they can't, or maybe not enough, which could be all the difference between being liquid or not, or purchasing or not, or surviving or not. So it's a big piece of the pie in what you're doing now. And I think, as you mentioned, people who have been looking for the big win and chasing the big win because they saw other people getting a big win, what do they call it? The unicorn. They're chasing the unicorn property, whereas give us the workhorse.
Yes.
I don't want the unicorn. I want the workhorse will be there that'll just plod forever and ever and ever, rather than a flash in a pan, so to speak.
Absolutely. So there are a few things that people, as they went through 2021, they did in the portfolio. One was quite a few people have actually postponed constructions because the cost has gone through the roof, right? Then next year we're going to see migration, hopefully, come back to its normal, if not higher than normal, to catch up. So a combination of no construction, new migration coming in, will then start reshaping where the rental market sits. And this is where there will be some people that, as we're getting into the tail end of this year, which we are, if you're setting your leases for 12 months and the legislation in that state actually allows you to actually do 6 months, the smarter thing would be to do it for 6 months, because more than likely the rental market will take off in select areas. Of course, we got to put that disclaimer on. It will take off next year as well.
So let's just sort of dot point that. So we have a tightening of credit policy, which will hamper people's ability to borrow.
And therefore buy.
So there'll be a reduced number of potential purchases in the market, whether that be investors or homeowners. Side note, you can see the homeowners starting to flee the market now because they can't afford to. You've got international borders which are scheduled to open up, and the Treasurer has said we need hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people every year for the foreseeable future to aid in recovery. The cost of construction has gone up, therefore making it harder to construct profitably.
Values in the valuer's eyes may start coming down as well.
Correct. Then who's going to supply the accommodation?
That's it.
Which we've mentioned before. So those little not so obvious components or factors of COVID will absolutely play into the next few years. And as you mentioned, there will be areas where the rents will increase dramatically. There'll be areas where the rents, I believe, will soften as well.
Depends on the supply coming into that market, right? Especially the unit market in certain pockets.
Or maybe even some regional areas.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Regional areas definitely.
Not all. Before you hate on us, not all.
No, and we're not saying that regional isn't a good area to invest.
We buy regional. Yeah. So it's just not all. Because that's another major component of COVID is the sea change. Sea change.
It still hasn't taken off.
No one's taken. Oh, no, there was one newspaper article that picked it up, but didn't go.
I think you bribed the journalist.
It was like page 76. It's one line. So, but sea change and tree change has definitely been a result of COVID, and maybe people's awareness to live life on their terms, perhaps in conjunction with job security and work from home and and that's obviously another major one is the work from home or the blended work environment. All of these things are going to have a major effect over the years. In fact, some of them, we often mention that, and we did, I think, a couple of podcasts ago, about data. We live it, we breathe it, we rely upon it like oxygen. But a lot of the time we're looking for the sustainable trend before data, because that sustainable trend translates into data. And then it becomes well known. And the sea change, tree change, whether it be good, bad or ugly, is one of those trends. Whether it's sustainable or not in all areas is yet to be seen. but even the work from home environment. Watch houses start to be built, new construction be built with home offices.
Yeah. I think it's already a trend now.
Yeah, but like in scale, not all areas. Like you're not going to get it in Burke.
No.
Nothing against Burke. Love Burke, live there. But in your metropolitan areas, or even those that are in the commutable distances from metropolitan areas and employment, you'll start to see it. Therefore, in combination with the cost of construction, you'll see renovations take off.
Yeah.
Because people won't get the money to borrow for the new house.
So they'll modify the existing.
So they'll modify the existing one. Maybe it's a good time to buy into shares in Bunnings and Wesfarmers. That wasn't financial advice. I was just saying.
And Bunnings, if you're listening, you can sponsor the podcast.
Yeah. Sponsor it on the camera. Like I'll even put a sticker right here. It's as long as I get a free sausage sizzle.
You're cheap.
I know, right? I am very cheap. But so all of these little factors are all coming together for a major, I'm not going to call it a shake-up, but it's
a reshape.
It's a reshape of not just the way people think, but obviously the market, and not even just our asset class. And we invest in all asset classes. Property is just our flavour. But all asset classes will be changed.
Yeah.
For the short, medium, and in some cases the long term, without fail.
Yeah, and as a forward predictor, which would be a precursor to next podcast, watch the speculators come out next year.
The speculators, in terms of,
I want to catch up. I need to make a quick buck. I need to rush in, and that combined with the New Year's resolution surge, you watch that happen.
Well, let's flesh that out for a minute, because that's actually really interesting. Because when you combine those that are trying to play catch up, and I'm being quite general, with a New Year's resolution, with maybe the right information in front of them, or what they digest via the different media platforms, there could definitely be a speculative approach to investing. I also believe, though, there'll be a speculative approach to investing on the opposite side.
People sitting off, backing off.
People backing off, or even worse, saying, this is the end of the world, rates are going to triple up.
Let's offload. And if you get enough people doing that, it becomes self-perpetuating. Yes. And the media catches on, and it becomes the truth.
Yeah, and it's self-fulfilling prophecy. Either way, up market or down market or no market.
Yeah.
But I actually believe, and this is a bit of next week's or the week after's podcast, I actually believe that there could potentially be a hesitation in the market, all for about a quarter.
Yeah.
1 quarter.
Because people sort of sit back and say, okay, what's really panning out?
Yeah.
There'd be a lot of movers and shakers in the early new year, people moving homes, moving jobs, moving states in that sense as well. So yes, that definitely would be a likely pause in the market. I'm not saying that the market will stop. I'm not saying that the market will falter in terms of growth, but there would be people taking a hard look at their circumstances.
Because what usually happens is humans by nature want to see, they might have a great idea, they might have a great concept, but they want to see social proof.
Yeah.
So they want to see results before someone else be the guinea pig. And then if it works, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
And that's human nature. So, and that creates FOMO. So that was at the beginning of 2020. As people rationalised, then realised, then a lot of people hung off, and then it just gained momentum. We might actually see that
in reverse
this time, but also that hesitation. People might start to see rents go up. So the commercial aspect of residential real estate, meaning that as the rents go up, the cash flow clearly increases. It becomes more attractive. They'll wait for that to happen to see social proof before they then jump in. So that hesitation in the market might be a sideways movement until they see, well, okay, the world isn't imploding, or the markets aren't imploding, and that there's actually sunshine, and then they jump back in. So it might be a two or three step market is my prediction.
So I guess the listener out there would be thinking, okay, so what do I do? Do I hold? Do I do a buy?
What
do I
guys
sell? What are they talking
about,
right?
Yeah.
And the reality, the answer to that is this. It depends on your circumstances, depends on your foundations, it depends on your goals. There is money to be made in any market, but understand that property is a medium to long-term venture.
Yeah. I think what this will do the next 4 years, 5 years, it's going to show whose portfolios are fragile or agile.
Ooh, good one.
100%. It'll happen.
Yeah.
And you know why? Because it happened last time.
And
the time before that.
Yeah.
And the time before that. So those that are built on solid foundations, and everybody's unique, but basically a combination of growth and cash flow, not even just what the portfolio presents, but personally.
Yes.
And how much, more importantly, how much you retain, how liquid you are, that will be
you've said something really important here, right? So it is not about how much you earn. It's about how much you retain, right? So for those that have played the Rich Dad, Poor Dad board game, cash flow, you'd realize that usually if you get the janitor, you actually win, because as a janitor, even though you're earning less money as opposed to the surgeon, as a surgeon, you had a lot more expenses in that game. You had a lot more expenses, and therefore you actually at a disadvantage. Whereas being a janitor, you had less expenses, so you're able to retain a lot more money and therefore invest into far better assets.
I'm smiling because I can just see now the emails I get, and you'll get them as well, from our doctor and surgeon clients going, that's so true. It's, or it might be the other way around. They might say, you guys know nothing. Jon Snow. It's so essentially what we're doing is we're, as investors, take away all the noise.
Yep. That's critical. Take away the noise.
Yeah, and just know that it's long-term, as we all keep saying, because it is that important. And essentially you're looking to create a strategy to bridge the gap from where you are now to where you want to be.
Yes.
And that won't be an overnight scenario. Yes, you will get wins along the way above and beyond your wildest expectations, but it'll annualize, average out over the years.
That's right. One of the things that I had put up on our Facebook page a while back was a saying from Tony Robbins, which was, people overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in a decade. And if you really wanted to drill down as to what Steve and I mean, go back to a couple of our podcasts and listen to our Design Your Decade, where we map out the process of actually investing for the medium to long term and how you can actually replace your income using property.
It's probably one of our most popular episodes is around that Design a Decade, and it's something that we're always asked about. Well, what does it mean and how do you do it? And so go back to the podcasts. I think there was 2 parts.
Yes.
To listen to it, and we may have even done a couple of Facebook Lives. I can't remember, but it's such a useful tool, because a decade is a long time.
It is a very long time,
and it's also a great time to reshape your mindset and the processes on where you want to be. It doesn't mean in 10 years you're going to reach, the holy grail of life. It just means you'll be well on your way with some sound, fundamental, process-driven steps and some attitude. Yeah. In Justin Herald's book, as he would say. All right.
That was a long-winded thing about next year.
It was. I don't even know if did we even touch the subject?
We didn't even scratch it.
Yeah. It's but clearly there's been so much, and as we said in the beginning, some of it's obvious, some of it's not so obvious. But that happens every time. And the next couple of years I believe, will be just as exciting as the last couple and the couple before that and the decade before that. It'll just be different.
Yep.
That's all it is.
That's right.
And if you're in a position to be able to take advantage of that, whatever that looks like to you, in whatever the asset class is to you, then well done. But you need to be starting now.
Yeah, absolutely. So tune into our next podcast within the next fortnight. But before that, if you're listening to this now, go back to our Facebook page, listen and watch our Facebook Lives. We'll have one last one within the next week. And once you've listened to the podcast, my suggestion is to go backwards in time to see historically how we've predicted the market, not from what's the property going to do, but how you can shape your portfolio based on the market to have a medium to long-term view in property.
Do you know what the interesting thing is? How long have we been doing the podcast for?
6 years now. Thereabouts.
But even before we did the podcast, or actually even during the podcast, before COVID, we held what was called Right on Track meetings. So whether it was Melbourne or Sydney, we'd get together physically with whoever could make it in different areas of Sydney and Melbourne. Live event. We do that every fortnight. And that's been doing 15 years or thereabouts. Yes, it's a long time. It's
showing your age.
Your age. It's but our message has not changed since day one, 15, 20 years ago, through to today. Through all those different cycles, we still talk about the same things, even when others aren't, because it may not be as sexy.
Yeah. So the methodology has, withstood the test of time. And the reason it's done that is because it's a fundamental, simplistic approach, taking away all of the fluff and going down to, the nitty-gritty of it to say this is how it needs to be done.
In fact, we even did a podcast, I'm sure we did, or was it a Facebook Live, now that I say that out loud, on the worst mistakes we've ever made. So we're quite happy to talk about the biggest mistakes we've ever made. In fact, the one that, actually I'm not going to put the mock on it yet, I might have sold my biggest mistake. But it's important to share those mistakes because we tried something that didn't work. Even over the test of time, that was still crap. But we're happy to share those as well. So go all the way back. And in fact, there's a lot of people that binge listen to the podcasts. Christmas is a good time. We might release some over the Christmas period and the New Year's period just to let everybody know where they are, I guess. And as you mentioned, we've got one more Facebook Live. We've got one more podcast, which will be somewhere towards the end of the month. And that's where we're going to talk about the predictions for next year. Not necessarily around the markets. So don't get too amped up about that. It's just about how we see things fleshing out and the ramifications, whether it be good, bad or ugly, and therefore the market as well.
We'll see you then.
If you could, though, just leave us some feedback. We really do appreciate it. There's a lot of people behind the scenes and we all get a kick out of it. So give us thumbs up. I was going to thumbs up, wrong platform. Give us a rating, stars, 1 or 5, whatever you think is fair, because once again, it does mean a lot to us. And we will see you and talk to you in the next few weeks.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature, does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs, and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.